What's popping, y'all? So today we're gonna be looking at a special episode of Middle Ground called Undecided. Basically, they'll explain a little bit more about it later, but essentially this episode is talking about should minors transition, and this is probably a lot of what they're gonna be talking about today. So let's jump right into it.
Today we're bringing a new version of Middle Ground. We'll be exploring the topic,
Jen.
should minors be allowed to medically transition? We'll be introducing an undecided group, and they'll be listening to a discussion between liberals and conservatives, and the undecided group will pick a side after each prompt. Transitioning has become a social media trend.
Absolutely agree. I mean, it is just skyrocketing, the amount of children that you see falling into this, and we need to stop it.
Absolutely not. People said the same thing about people coming out being lesbian, gay, or bisexual as it got more normalized, as people became more accepting of like their children and things like that. They're like, everybody wants to be gay. Now social media is around, people my age, like we see other trans people, and being aware that that's something that's being accepted by other people makes you more comfortable with yourself and like comfortable with like internalizing that it's okay to be trans in public.
I will say this, like trans and really much the LGBTQIA plus community has been around since the beginning of time in the Western mindset, perception, and like the way we look at history and all that. It's been very, blocked out because there has been instances where, different tribes, different groups of people around the world have expressed gender in many different ways to a point where they might have not medically transitioned, but they are not falling into the Western gender norms. And just because we're now seeing more often on social media, more often in, being normalized, doesn't mean it's growing. It's more so people are now feeling more comfortable coming out about that type of stuff, rather than you have the 60s where a lot of closeted people, especially men, were hiding that type of stuff, and not really expressing that out.
If that's the case, if more people are transitioning simply because it's more acceptable, then how can your side also say that there's a trans genocide happening? Those are completely opposite. No, I know you didn't, but liberals say that all the time. They're saying that there's a trans genocide for some reason. So I'm just curious as to how you would square that circle. Because we hear people saying simply because legislation is being passed across the country that is banning minors from being able to transition, that automatically means that those children would commit suicide. And that is simply an abusive statement in of itself.
Statistically,
says that
minors who aren't able to transition who would like to do end up.
Why don't we have this? Why don't we have this? Why don't we have the same suicide rates in the past if that was the case?
How could we?
I don't agree with what Sarah is saying, because you can obviously say that there are a lot more people coming out as trans, but you can also say there's a very much, crusade against trans people, and quote unquote trans genocide is happening right now through legislation because they're preventing those people to come out through trans. They've said that, the rates statistically are higher for individuals who aren't able to transition, who have gender dysmorphia, because they're not really able to express themselves fully. And like, if you ain't able to express yourselves fully, then, you have more, worse quality of life. Let's say that per se.
How could we have known that the people who were committing suicide were transgender if they didn't feel safe to come out?
And that was another point I was gonna make against Sarah too. Like, you can't really like say like, oh well, we would have same rates in the past for individuals who are trans, and it's just like you don't know because it wasn't as socially acceptable to talk about that type of stuff. So you could have been like unalive yourself, and people could have been like, okay, maybe it was school, maybe it was work, maybe your spouse cheated on you, all that, and it could have been you were trans. That wasn't really an acceptable term, and I don't think it's just fair to really compare those rates to now, because even now we're still trying to normalize that term, and there's people that's still trying to like bury that term.
In Denmark, 2023,
I got that
42-year longitudinal study, and what they found is that the mental health issues did not decline, they actually were augmented. It was worse for individuals who thought that by transitioning they would solve their mental health issues. It actually got worse. It doesn't help, it doesn't solve these issues. It shows it's a contagion. That is the key.
Yeah, that's definitely not contagion. But let me just go here. I got the article for the site. But so basically, when you talk about transgender identity and amount of unalive attempts and mortality in Denmark, basically when you talk about this study, this was a 42 long year study, longitudinal study. And so basically out of the 3,759 individuals who were identified as trans, accounting for about 21,000 person years. That's not all important right now. There were about 92 attempts as well as 12 actual unalive, deaths that took place during, that time frame. And so when you look at that, they do have a higher rate of unalive themselves than their non-trans, counterparts. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really state any examples of why is that so. And so him automatically, oh, it's a mental health issue. They have mental health issues. It's a contagion. They had a lot going on. That doesn't really, you can't really draw a conclusion from that. Like, you can infer all that stuff, but like, I can also infer to the fact that, mental health issues also come from the fact that we don't live in a socially acceptable society, even in Denmark. The findings could suggest a even higher risk of unaliving by the LGBTQIA plus population in other places such as the United States, where transgender people and others have been targeted by laws restricting bathroom use for trans individuals or gender affirming care and drag performances. When we talk about some of the specific, things that trans individuals might suffer, along with being trans, they might face widespread poverty, widespread discrimination. They're more likely to experience homelessness. They're overrepresented in our nation's prison system, our nation's foster care system as well. And that lack of material has very real consequences on life, including, and up to early childhood unalivings or self-unalivings, or however you may see it. And so in general, I'm talking about Arthur right here. Like, yes, you can say they go through a lot of mental health issues, but like I said earlier, they go through a lot more things, just being trans and like the mental things you have to deal with that, as well as the fact dealing with regular everyday things, finding places to eat, trying to make sure you have a roof on your head, trying to make sure you got your family taken care of, all that. Like, there's a lot of other things that is very much, you guys still take care of.
Sexes, there's male and female. Well, it's in the chromosomes. It goes beyond superficial or secondary characteristics. He is a male. He was born a male. He will remain a male. It doesn't matter how many chemicals he puts into his body or how many body parts are cut off. And I'll say this again. Telling the truth is not a mental illness.
Do you have a response to that?
Yeah, I think that there is a difference between sex and gender, and I know you're going to disagree with me, but...
She even knows, like, sex and gender are two different things, y'all. Like, you can be born a man, you can be born a female, but at the end of the day, the way you express yourself is going to be a lot different, and, depending on what society you live in, depending on what culture you live in, like, what religion... cultural aspects, as well as like, what's going on in that society is going to like influence your decision. Like, at the end of the day, we've had many different tribes, many different cultures, and many different places that, express their gender norms a lot differently. Like, for example, when we talk about the West, we have grown up in like this two-parent household type mentality, the nuclear family ideology, where the man goes to work, get bread, make the food and all this stuff, and like go get the bread, bring it home, bring home the bacon, whatever. And the woman stays at home, educate the children. They, are doing the domestic duties, taking care of the house, whatever like that too. And they live in those two spheres. Like, that's just how we were raised and we thought of like ourselves in the Western sense. But there's many different cultures, especially in Africa, where like, you have the village. Like, it's not just the man that takes care of the child, but basically, the village takes care of their children and all that. As well as, you have many different cultures throughout the world that might have different interpretations on how they might look. So at the end of the day, what he's saying about, oh, there's a sex in female, like, that's chromosomes. Like you can do what it, like, those are just genetic bycodes. But like, when you talk about what man should do and what man should express themselves or how they should express themselves, at the end of the day, it just depends on what culture you're in.
As I said earlier, that is just accounted by survivorship bias. People previously were not comfortable enough with coming out, and that's where that difference comes from. And eventually that skyrocketing rate will even out.
I definitely do think that that is kind of a factor of it, that, I mean, people are just coming out more and are feeling more accepted. And I absolutely do believe that, that is a good that social media has done. But I do also kind of push back on the idea that it's just completely that. Like, when you look at figures who, rise to prominence, like, for example, Dylan Mulvaney, these are people with huge platforms that, are reaching to, younger people who are at stages in their lives where, they are exploring ideas of gender and gender expression and identity. And so I guess personally, I would push back a little bit against the idea that it's just people who, had it been more accepting in the past, they would have come out. I do think there is, a rise. I mean, I feel like the numbers just don't really account for it necessarily being just that group of people. I think
transitioning isn't something that you know, you can just say you are like you can say definitely say it, and like there's definitely a lot of surveys out there that, you know, gets data about people just basically saying that this is how I feel, this is how I want to express my gender and all that. But when we talk about data statistics where we actually trying to base evidence off of, we're talking about like individuals actual transitioning. And yes, you know, we can't really get the true numbers based on, you know, just hard data, because data isn't oftentimes representative of like, you know, the full cases. Like, for example, you know, there are individuals that might not have access to the care that they want to fully transition. But when it comes to like the American Medical Association making policies or trying to advocate for policies towards expanding gender affirming care, that is not coming from like, you know, surveys. A lot of that stuff is coming from data, like from hospital data and all that, in medical records, to the point that, you know, people are transitioning more. And to be able to transition, it takes, I would call it like a three-prong approach from what I've done research on. Like, you need an actual doctor, a provider, you need a therapist, a psychiatrist slash whatever, you know, some like a healthcare mental health team. And basically you need the parents' consent for individuals to be able to transition if they're a minor. And oftentimes that doesn't happen within a month, 2 months and all that. It might take a few years for that process to happen. But at the end of the day, the researchers we are getting it from have shown that, you know, people are transitioning. Like, there has been an uptick in transitions even when you go through that multi-stage process.
Community is pushing gender transitions for financial gain.
So I disagree.
Even before I say all this, medical community is not pushing this, because if medical community really want to make money off of this, they really would have had every insurance plan, especially in, you know, not just the government insurance plans, but private insurance plans will really try to hamp up their coverage of, you know, gender affirming care and all that. Like, and that's not what we're seeing, or we're not trying to make that like a guarantee, or that's not being legislated in law.
I mean, when I started going through my process of transitioning, I didn't feel pushed by any medical professional at all. There were, in fact, quite the opposite, a lot of hurdles and just like
exactly what I've
red
said earlier about
the
multi steps
work through.
for
but it's not
being
something
diagnosed
that
to
I think in my experience was pushed onto me, at least.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. When I started my transition, it took over a year just for me to get to my third doctor's appointment.
Yep.
So here, but they're still getting paid and they're still getting financial. I actually think there's 3 different types of doctors.
Okay,
I think that there are people that are going out there and doing it for financial gain. We saw it in Vanderbilt. We saw it in so many other instances.
Vanderbilt. I think they're talking about the Vanderbilt University thing. Basically Vanderbilt had a transgender health clinic that suspended gender affirming surgery for minors. Now a lot of that is due to like the policies with transgender services, you know, being highly debated in Tennessee. But pretty much when I want to talk about gender affirming care is basically not just surgery. Like, you know, people think about top surgery or like boob reduction, all that. Gender affirming care is basically like social care, basically, you know, screening individuals, talking to therapists, you know, talking to the family, all that, getting the history, school history, and like just basically understanding the needs of a child. Pretty much it goes from that step then to like doing like, you know, hormone blockers. Basically, you know, you talk about people not wanting their children to be on blockers and all that, and thinking that it might be some irreversible treatment. Like, no, basically hormone blockers are said to be irreversible from my knowledge. And pretty much it's more about to stopping puberty from taking place and actually putting some type of change in the body or making something that's permanent. And then when you talk about actual like surgery and all that, which is very rare in minors, like it is very rare. A lot of that is done with parental consent if the child is under, you know, 18. But many individuals who are actually getting, you know, that type of surgery, those are oftentimes adults, as well as like, you know, the small minority that are children are getting parental consent and getting provider consent and getting therapeutical, you know, and therapists consenting to it. So it's not like this basic thing where people like thinking that doctors are handing this out like candy and like they're just trying to get paid and stuff like this.
Universal health care.
Yeah, and
anything to consider there.
So with the
Socialized medicine.
With the Vanderbilt situation, she actually said because of Obamacare they have to pay for it. And so they are forcing insurance companies to pay for it. So it became a big money maker, was her specific phrase that she said.
I'm not familiar with the Vanderbilt situation, but let's look up. So when it comes to federal government and like when she was saying, or they were saying like Obamacare, you know, is forcing people to pay for it. that is ultimately a mixed bag because our healthcare system is a mixed bag of private, federal and nonprofit health insurances. When it comes to the federal government, Medicare, Medicaid, CHIP, TRICARE, VHA, and IHS services. When it comes to Medicare, it means all medically necessary, care, especially when we talk about older folks. And typically, depending on Part A, B, or C, or D, whatever that care might fall under, it will pretty much, you will be required to pay, a certain amount of it. And so the government isn't just totally covering. And when it comes to Medicaid, which is, like I said, for lower income people, that oftentimes, will let open a lot of care options when it comes to like just prevention care and all that. But when we're talking about, gender affirming care in all its facets, such as primary care, social care, physiological care, and then actual surgeries and all that, it basically is up to the states because Medicaid is funded in part by the states, and only 2 of the 41 states responded to the survey. Maine and Illinois reported covering all 5 services. 2 states, Alabama and Texas, reported not covering any of these services. And so pretty much, depending on what state you are in, is just generally going to depend, what is going to get paid for. And so while those are not concrete numbers, with her statement saying that Obamacare is forcing you to pay for it, like, let's just be real for a second. It just depends on what state you are most of the times, and it's just like not all things are medically covered. And so that is pretty much an inaccurate statement because, like I said, we live in a fragmented healthcare system, and it's just we can't just get our stuff together to know what is being covered, what is not being covered. So I just want to point that out.
People to transition who are just signing off on prescriptions because, yes, I mean, like the points were made that there is money to be made, of course, but I don't know that I'd go as far as to say, that there is this, like, I think someone mentioned it on the liberal side, that there's like a conspiracy going on. I don't think that's the case. I think, again, there are absolutely predatory, practitioners and maybe even large organizations who are looking to profit off of, the medical transitioning process.
That's the thing in America.
But, I think someone mentioned, the aspect of personal experiences and how for many trans people, it's extremely expensive.
Exactly. Like I've been saying, they would have lowered the cost of entry, lowered the barrier of entries for trans individuals to get care if really they wanted to, truly make money off of it, including politicians, because they pay out by big pharma.
100,000, but like one surgery. So like a vaginoplasty cost about $20,000 to $30,000. I think the phalloplasty costs more, and then you go down a little bit with top surgeries and stuff like that. But it's still thousands of dollars. At least, I mean, a breast augmentation is about $10,000.
I've had children.
But how about we actually get numbers on how much money has been made off of surgeries? Like I need to see that some numbers, because you can say averages over 100,000, 200,000 people all day, but it's just like, is people really making money off these surgeries currently with the way it's being covered? Like, that's something I really want to know. Ultimately, this is a short video. I'm trying to make it as short as possible, so I won't look that up. But that's one thing I would say on Sarah's part that she need to do a better job at, like how much money has been made off currently? Because if she's saying there's this big crusade, like, oh, there's examples of this father and this, have been making, money off of this, of their sons getting, deep transition and stuff. I think Arthur made that claim earlier. But, where's the money? You just can't say these things without having the proof.
An age-appropriate time, I agree, yes.
Yeah.
What is that age appropriate?
I think by grades 3 or 4, they understand.
8, 9.
So what is that, like around 8,
10,
9?
I think, yeah.
I don't know anymore. My kids are too old. But that sounds about right. I think 8 or 9 years old is a good time, because gender is...
Arthur just fuming in his seat like, oh my God, I hate this. He just hates being there. But real quick, I would say I don't see nothing wrong with, individuals learning about trans, things in education, especially sex ed. Now, sex ed, I think that should be more of like middle school and all that. You're talking about like intercourse. But when we talk about expression, gender identity, and all that, sex identity, like people, like individuals knowing themselves, I think it's important for them to start learning early on that, hey, people might express themselves differently than you. That doesn't mean you can bully them. That doesn't mean you can, think they look differently. It's just that's how they want to be. Let them be who they want to be at the end of the day. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with that.
I think right now, a lot of the mainstream sort of education on sex ed is pretty like vulgar. You're looking at a couple like books. You see a lot of parents going out to like city committee meetings, and they're reading books in front of like the school committee. And the school has to like stop the entire thing because they're reading such vulgar stuff.
If I had to, all right, to make his answer, a little bit shorter, there's a lot more instances where, it could be just about maybe a kid just picked up a random book out of the library and just probably started reading it at home, and then your parents just found out, and then now they're making aware of it at the school board meeting. Then, actually like, curriculum and teachers are trying to push down kids' throats. I feel like most of it is very moderate. Like I've talked to many teachers like of my age, who Gen Z, who are more open and accepting, and they also always agree that we're not going to talk about intercourse when it comes to like little like kids and stuff like that too. But they at least are starting to understand there's a difference between, boys liking boys, girls liking girls, and girls liking boys, and all this, as well as, hey, not every boy loves to play with action figures. Some boys like to, wear dresses like princesses and stuff, and some girls like to like, I know I'm making this a very small, example of it. It's not really a true estimate of what's going on, but there's some girls that like to play GI Joe and all that.
To be talking to children about that.
It shouldn't be.
It really boils down to
it's
it is
forced
a
upon
parental
teachers.
rights issue, and parents make the ultimate decision how their children learn that.
I disagree only because like where I'm from North Carolina, and there was a point where sex ed wasn't being taught. And then there was a point where it was, and when they started teaching sex ed, there were children that were coming forward about like being touched inappropriate and things like that because they didn't know that those things were inappropriate parts because they hadn't been taught otherwise. So not teaching children about their bodies, about their sex, about their gender, about their expression, you're limiting them. You're giving people, pedophiles specifically, the opportunity to prey on them because they don't know any better. You're leaving them in the dark.
I
as
just
far as
don't
like
Okay, so my thing with kids and stuff like that too, I think sex ed is just still one of those iffy topics. But generally talking about sex ed in general, I don't see nothing wrong with talking about sex ed in schools because parents often beat around the bush, don't even talk about the topic. Like I didn't even learn from sex ed from my parents. I learned it from school. They just keep it $1.50. But one thing I think sex ed, a lot of people don't understand about it, was his point exactly. Like sex ed isn't just to teach kids how to have sex. It's basically for kids to learn, identify what sex is, if it's illegal for you to be having it, as well as like, if you're being touched inappropriately by an adult, please talk to somebody. And yes, you can talk to little kids about that when you talk about, no parts in like private areas and go tell an adult, whatever. But when you get into like age, I think 14 to like the teenage years, when you start bringing in insecurities, when you talk about, peer pressure, when you talk about consent and all that stuff needs to be formalized and taught at that age so kids don't end up getting, unexpected pregnancy or, having to be peer pressure into consenting into something, as well as teaching men how to have consent and stop having men act like dogs all the time. Like as a young man myself, I would appreciate it if people actually just sit there and just sat down with me and say like, hey, make sure you teach consent. If a girl says maybe, or I don't know, or this, don't do that. Don't engage, because you're seeing, especially with this alpha male culture now, men think they are deserved to have sex. They need to have sex, that they need to like really be push themselves on women.
And that is a very U.S. way of thinking, is that parental rights trump everything else, because there's a Convention of Children's Rights worldwide, and the U.S. is the only country who hasn't signed on to it. So children in other countries have rights before their parents do. And I think that it should be taught in schools to protect the child, not just so that the parent gets to make all the rules.
I also agree with that too, because you got parents out here thinking they know what best for their kids, like who are conservative or too liberal, and they really don't know what their kids want, and just like trying to push their ideals onto their kids. Like, I'm progressive, just get that straight, but I feel like if your kids don't want to be progressive, don't try to force some ideals on them. Like, that's my main thing about it. As well as conservative parents need to stop trying to, pigeonhole their kids into thinking that the world is a certain way, in this old modern way that doesn't exist no more, and really like messing up with the developments. And so I agree with what she was saying. It's just, I don't think parents' rights should trump everything over kids' rights. Like, I think kids first and foremost need to be looked at as a special population, and they are a special population to protect, just like elderly folk, as well just as, minorities and all that.
Which side do you guys resonate with more, liberals or conservatives?
For me, we're talking about mental health issues. And there are a whole host of problems that children deal with when they're struggling with identity or gender dysphoria. Let's treat those issues. Let's treat those causes. I have mentioned numerous cases of former trans kids who were pushed into it, parents who tried to protect their kids and were punished for doing so. This is a very fraught affair. These are irreversible, damaging procedures, and we have so many detransitioners that are coming out warning the next generation not.
Okay, so how many people are actually detransitioning? Because this man, they've been saying detransitions a lot, and I'm just like, what facts and figures are you pushing out? Like, that's one thing. Like, I don't really don't like about this format either way. 'Cause I feel like they haven't really given out data either. But like, that's one thing I need to know. Like, if you're gonna be saying statements, like, you need to be like, okay, what facts are you trying to prove it? Like, I wish that's what the host is trying to challenge more of them about. Like, what facts are doing this? Like, oh, what study are you pulling this research from, or like, where are you getting these things from? Like, instead of just looking at like a TikTok, be like, oh my god, there's more detransitioners, coming out. Like, that's one thing I really want them to do more of.
Age of adulthood, we shouldn't be mutilating them.
And they're not mutilating people
at a young
like
age, and I think
going to mental health care and going to age blockers and stuff is not mutilating young children. Like, I think at most, when it comes to that Vanderbilt, study, in the article, let me try and look it up again. And since it was established in 2018, this clinic has only provided an average of 5 minors per of care of services or surgical services for an average of 5 minors per year. In all those cases, the patients were at least 16, had parental consent, and not have had received genital procedures. So not top surgery, not breast reduction surgeries, none of that. So we need to stop saying we're mutilated kids. We're not mutilated kids. And it's just one of those emotional appeals that they're trying to appeal to bring about like fear into the public about this issue that's not really a big issue for the most of the public.
Transition, use hormone blockers, start cross hormones at an appropriate age when the body is ready to be receiving cross hormones later on. I also agree that we shouldn't be mutilating children. I don't believe anyone's being mutilated, but surgery doesn't have to happen before 18 if they are already being treated with cross hormones or hormone blockers.
Exactly.
And
Most
we
of them
can wait
are.
until they're 18 if we are helping them and affirming their gender. I don't believe anybody has an agenda of chopping children up.
Yeah, I would just say ultimately those who are promoting this and those who are accepting it will be accountable. We're seeing a lot of different lawsuits coming out. There's a transgender or detransitioner who is now suing Kaiser Permanente up in like San Jose area.
Can someone
because
fact check this? Because why do I have to fact check all this? I mean, that's my job. So one of the largest medical providers in California is now being sued for providing gender transition services to a teenage girl. 18-year-old Chloe Cole said Thursday that she's suing Kaiser Permanente for a transgender surgery that performed on her when she was 13. In complaint filed with San Juan Superior Court, her lawyers claims a team of doctors at Kaiser Permanente confirmed what they describe as a mutilating sex change experiment instead of focusing more on Cole's mental health, which they say included gender dysphoria. It's become a national debate with some arguing children are capable of understanding the magnitude of gender transitions. Cole, who said her parents support her decision to sue the hospital, explained that she has since detransitioned back to her gender at birth. In an email to NBC Bay Area responding to the lawsuit, Kaiser said their gender affirming care meets all medical standards. They added that hospitals use a team of doctors and other medical professionals to provide information, counseling, and other support to families, and leaves any final decision about gender up to the patients and their parents. Can we get a debate on like what specifically they're suing for, like what medically they did? Because if it was like the hormone treatment, it's like gender blockers, in my knowledge at least, those are reversible. Like those can be stopped at any time. It's not like, you're actually having surgery to change your appearance or anything like that. I don't even think it will be pretty much relevant for him to even bring it up. And even in this case, he don't even know what gender of the girl, basically what he was, referring to. So do you have all the facts to the case? I don't know. I want to see their thoughts.
What's been great about this video is that a lot of you guys have switched different spectrums. So let's start out with what made you go to the liberal side.
I think that you made some really good points about being able to start puberty blockers and socially transition. And like surgeries do not need to happen before 18. they can happen after, but as long as the person can decide to start puberty blockers and decide to socially transition, because what if they don't make it to 25?
Like she said.
I just
So, you know, it's
can't
emotional
imagine
for
my
her,
life
yeah.
without them, and if they were not, like, if they're not able to transition, I know the effect that will have on their life, and I can't imagine it.
I think for me, what made me come to the conservative side is I definitely think that social transitioning is acceptable. I think of the case of like Angelina Jolie's daughter, who went through a long phase of, I guess, we were not entirely sure if it was gender dysphoria or not, but wanted to present as male, and then came to an age when they did decide that that was something they no longer wanted to do. And so I really respect that opinion, and I am also concerned about that. I really genuinely, we also, if we're not entirely sure like what the medical, you know, transitioning has long-term effects, or like the medicine itself on brain development and all that stuff, I think we should just be very wary of letting children transition, even if it is with medical, you know, teams, because as you said earlier, science is constantly a changing field.
And that's how most kids transition. Most kids socially transition before they actually get medical teams. Like, very rarely, like I said, teens or kids actually get surgeries. And to get this note from 2022, I think this was published in 2022, October last year. Basically, you know, there was like 282 kids, you know, who got top surgery in 2021. And at the end of the day, you know, that wasn't really a big jump in increase as we're seeing in, like, you know, hormone therapy, as well as puberty blockers, you know, like at the end of the day, and more diagnosis of gender dysphoria. And I kept saying dysmorphia. I'm sorry for my pronunciation, but dysphoria has been rising, and that's more because we are actually seeing more expansion of care being for individuals who are experiencing that. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're just getting that all of a sudden, you know, at the end of the day.
I lean right now a little bit more on the conservative side, and I think the point you made about how we just don't know really like the detransition rate, transitioning as a process, you know, medical transition, also social transition, and you're absolutely right. You know, in 10 years from now, you know, someone's experience might not be the exact same. I'm not saying that that's the case for everyone. I'm saying that that's probably still not even the majority of people, but I do think it's still a significant amount to take into consideration. There's still a lot that maybe we just don't fully understand, and I think until we get to that point, I'll just err on the side of caution. At least that's how I see it.
Clearly, we all.
I think that's valid, but to outright totally just get rid of gender care as a thing, I don't think we should be doing that. I think we need to be more studied, and we need to have more, you know, conversation about it. But having politicians sitting up here and talking about, oh, we need to get rid of gender care, we need to do this, that, and third, like, that's not going to make the world a better place, unfortunately. With that being said, that has been Undecided by Jubilee. This is like kind of like a longish video, but I needed to do more like research and really just fact-based checking some of the sources they brought up. So if you like to see today, I know this is a break from all the Hamas and Israel conflicts, but like, subscribe, turn on post notifications, all that wonderful good stuff. If you want to see more of my Jubilee reaction videos, there's one right here. So I definitely encourage you to go see that. But stay warm, stay frosty, depending on what part of the country you're in, and peace out.